Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. Today's episode is a continuation of my conversation with Kirsten Black, author of the Faithful Paradox blog. When we left off last week, we were discussing a post she had written titled 10 Things That Were Different Than I Expected About Grief, and we had worked our way through the first 3 things. Today, we continue that conversation by picking up with number 4. We talk about the challenges of grieving within a family when everyone grieves differently, the unexpected ways healing can bring its own kind of sorrow, and why faith in Jesus does not necessarily make grief feel easier. Kirsten also shares what she's learned in the 3rd year of grief, what has helped her to endure, and what she would say to a parent in those raw early days after loss. This is a thoughtful, honest, and deeply encouraging conversation for anyone who has wrestled with the tension of sorrow and hope, and I'm pleased to share it with you today. Number 4, you said, I thought eventually everyone would see eye to eye. And you're talking about the people in your family, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Immediate family and extended family.
Sure.
I talked a little bit about Vince and I and how we've struggled with grief. And, Vince and I grieve really differently. He is one that he doesn't want to look back. He doesn't enjoy looking at pictures or watching videos. He wants to look forward. And he's like, I want to press forward for what's in front of us. And I'm one who likes to kind of sit and process through, and I look at pictures and I watch the videos and I do all of that. And so, and Vince and I will never be on the same page when it comes to grieving, and there's times that I think the way that people grieve is simply incompatible. And you have to learn how to meet one another in the midst of that incompatibility. Shortly after we lost Ezra, I came home one day and one of my sons was sitting at the piano and just weeping and playing. And he had an iPad there and he was watching videos of Ezra playing the songs that he had written on the piano. And he was trying to recreate those songs. And he was grieving, very clearly grieving. And so I sat with him and talked with him and cried with him. And then I went upstairs and one of my other sons was in his room with his door closed and his AirPods in, and he was crying. And he's like, I hate listening to that music. I hate hearing it. I hate that he's playing the piano. And like those 2 forms of grieving were completely incompatible with one another. Yeah. And I think that's the reality of grief, especially within a family, that there's going to be times that the way one person grieves just does not help another person grieve. And you have to learn to kind of find that middle ground of recognizing, like, my son went into his room and put his AirPods in. He didn't ask his brother to stop. He went and did what he needed to do in order to endure that grief process. And, Vince has had to learn to engage me in my grief, even though it's hard for him. And so he's had to learn to ask me questions and kind of and probe a little bit deeper. And I've had to learn to stop talking and to not go as deep as I would want to go in talking about grief sometimes, because there's times that for Vince, it kind of pulls him down. And so we've had to learn that dance of recognizing that we don't see eye to eye on what's helpful in grief. And that's hard.
Mm-hmm. It is a dance in many ways. And I think the bottom line, at least in our family, is giving each other grace.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Which is what your son did when he went and put his AirPods in and didn't stop his brother from doing what he needed to do. But we just have to have so much grace for each other in a family when we're grieving.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even just asking your family, like, what's helpful for you?
Yeah.
Like, getting to know what's helpful for the other person as they grieve. Because I think for me, it's really easy to get so self-centered and so focused on my own pain and my own grief that I forget that other people are grieving as well. And I forget that they have needs in their grief as well. And so
That's
really
right.
being intentional about asking, how can I walk with you well in this? And, so for some of my kids, it's talking about it. For some of my kids, they don't want to talk about it. And And so it really is learning and studying how to walk well with people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. So, your fifth thing that was not what you expected about grief, you said, I thought healing would bring joy.
Hmm.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a piece of grief that comes when you heal, because the reality is that as you heal, it also creates more grief. You
Yeah.
feel like you're losing a piece of your loved one all over again. And so the more I heal, the less I think about Ezra, and that brings sadness with it. I've had several times at the dinner table that I'll just say to the boys, I'm like, hey guys, can we just talk about Ezra? Like, I just want to talk about him because we don't talk about him very much anymore. And I miss him, and I miss talking about him. And so I think I thought that healing would look like joy. But even with that came this unexpected sense of grief, because it brought with it another sense of loss. And then I also think within our Christian subcultures, it's really easy to confuse joy and happiness,
Yes.
and they're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear a lot in Christian subcultures, you just need to choose joy.
Right.
Um, and I think that that can be really difficult in when you're grieving, because I think what most people actually mean is you need to choose happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
happiness is an emotion, and joy is a discipline of focusing on, the Philippians 2, like what's true and right and excellent and praiseworthy. And it's a choice to look for Jesus in the midst of pain and remember that it's not always going to be this hard. And so I think that joy and depression can and do coexist. Joy and sorrow can and do coexist. We can feel deep, deep sadness and ache and weep, all the while having joy, because joy is not an emotion. It's a discipline of looking to Jesus and trusting him in the midst of our sorrow.
That was beautifully expressed. Thank you for that. That's a complicated concept, and you just described it beautifully and
Well,
clearly. So,
thanks. Yeah, I've
yeah,
had to
thank you.
wrestle with it. I've had to
Yeah.
wrestle with it a lot because, you know, I I've struggled with happiness. I've struggled with joy, especially in the midst of so much grief, like wondering how am I ever going to feel happy again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so again, learning the discipline of focusing on what's true and that this life is not all there is, and that's where we can find our joy.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Very good. Like you, that whole choose joy subculture is
Yeah,
very challenging
it
after
is.
the loss of a child, and you almost feel like there's something wrong with you, or that people expect you to just they'll give you a period of time, but then after that they want you to be the old Kirsten again with
Hmm.
joy, and
Yeah,
they don't understand that Kirsten is gone. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, and I do love that in our culture now, we are seeing more discussion about lament in Christian
yeah,
circles.
for
That was
sure.
not a thing 16, almost 17 years ago when Hannah went to heaven. And I love that that is beginning to come to the fore, and people are talking about that more because,
Yeah,
like you said, it's a discipline. It's a fruit of the Spirit. It's a gift
yeah,
from God. But lament is all part of that too, and you can lament
yeah,
and have joy at the same time.
yeah,
Very different from happiness.
yeah, very different. And I do think that joy is worth fighting for.
Yes.
Um, it is a fruit of the Spirit. And I don't know that when you're in the midst of so much grief and sorrow, especially early on, like for me, happiness wasn't even on the table. Like I just
Right.
didn't even feel like it was within reach. And it took a
Right.
long time before I felt happy again. But joy of just holding on to the promises of what God has said is true and fighting to believe that, it didn't lift my sorrow. It didn't
Right.
make the grief any less, and that was a piece that was shocking for me, was that I think I believed that because I had faith somehow, and maybe that's one of my points later on. um, but just that I thought that having faith would make the grief less, and it
Yeah.
didn't.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, I agree 100%. So the sixth thing that was different than what you expected, you said, I thought life feeling a bit more normal would feel different than it does. What did
Yeah.
you mean by that?
I think I thought that life feeling normal would feel good. I think
Yeah.
I had this hopefulness that if life started to get back to normal, it would feel good again. It would feel normal.
Yeah.
But I think what I've realized is that there's a strangeness to life as well, and there's just always an empty space. And
Mm,
so I think I kind of liken it to like an amputee, like someone who has a leg that's amputated. They learn to walk again. They'll often get a prosthetic, but they don't ever walk quite the same way they did with when they had two legs. And
right.
and so there's a strangeness to their gait, even though they're walking and their life is looking very normal again. There's a strangeness to it, and so I think for me, it's recognizing that there's like hundreds of little reminders of what was, and it's just the silent battle of grief all the time, that can be so hard and exhausting. And so, like we have family dinners every night, but every night I go out to count six plates, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I only need six. I don't need seven. And so, even though family dinners are normal, it's just a part of what we do as a family. There's still a strangeness to it, and that every time I go to count plates, it's a reminder that Ezra's not there. And so, I think I had thought that it would be different, that life would get back to just feeling normal as always, and yet not recognizing that there's all these little reminders in your everyday daily tasks that are just there as a piece of what was lost.
Yes. I can relate to the plate
Hmm.
situation. Even after almost 17 years, it'll be 17 years in February since Hannah went to
Hmm.
heaven, and Bethany no longer lives at home, our other daughter. But when she does come to visit or when we're together and I reach into that cabinet and pull out three plates, every time I think,
Hmm.
oh, this should be four. I
Yeah.
feel it. I feel it
Yeah.
in my soul that I'm pulling
Yeah.
three plates out of the cabinet instead of four.
Yeah.
And that's 17 years later. Um, yeah, yeah, like you said, we think that being normal is better, but that normal never really quite comes back.
Yeah.
Um,
It doesn't. And I think that's one of the pieces that's so isolating and lonely about
yeah,
grief, is that you've got hundreds of those little reminders every day and no one realizes it. And
yes,
so, you're facing that constantly throughout the day, that you're pulling out plates or you're picking up socks or whatever it is that's part of your normal daily routine, and you have these just 100 little pinprick reminders throughout the day that you lost your child,
hmm,
and that life is not as it ought to be. And you get to a point that you don't want to invite people into every single one of those, because you're like,
right,
it would be exhausting for other people
yes,
to have to carry. But you also feel the isolating nature
hmm,
of it as well.
hmm, yeah. It does make you feel very isolated. Even
Hmm.
walking down the aisles in the grocery store and not buying that favorite food item
Yeah. Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
I still feel that also almost
Yeah.
17 years out from my loss. And like you
Yeah.
said, nobody else knows that. I think my family, if they're listening, would be surprised to hear me saying these things, that those things are still a part of my life even today, because we don't talk about those things. It's those little pricks that we get
Yeah.
in our heart every time we face a situation like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the hope is that it turns to like this sense of fondness, or,
Right?
fond
Nostalgia.
memories.
Hmm.
Yeah. But the reality is, I'm like, it still hurts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It still hurts.
It does. It hurts every time. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So the number seven thing that is different than what you expected is I thought faith would make it easier. We talked about that briefly a little bit ago, but I
Yeah.
think we could expand on that more.
Yeah, I think I assumed that having hope in Christ would mean that I ached less.
Yeah.
that knowing that Ezra is with Jesus would bring more comfort than it does. And I think I was shocked at how little comfort it initially brought. It gives us hope for what will be one day, but it doesn't necessarily lift the sorrow of the moment. And I was really shocked by that. That there is a future hope, but we hear that we're not to grieve as those who have no hope. And I think I misapplied that verse for all of my life until we lost Ezra, and assuming that because I had hope, the sadness wouldn't be so hard.
Yeah. I think I felt that way too, and still sometimes feel that way.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, even after all this time, there is a comfort in knowing that we'll see our children again. There's a
Yeah.
huge comfort in that. There's a comfort in knowing that the best is yet to come. But at the same time, you have that little twinge that says, yes, but they should be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's just, that God has more than made up for any losses that they may have experienced here on earth. Like, that,
absolutely.
but at the same time, we're given so few details about heaven and about eternity, that I pray often that God would just give me a small peek of Ezra in heaven.
Sure.
Because, like, when I dropped my son, my 18-year-old son, off at college, like, being able to see his room and being able to meet his roommates and being able to kind of picture where he is, it gave me so much comfort as his mom to be able to envision those things, so that when I am missing him, I can just imagine him in his dorm room, and I can,
Sure.
see him
Yeah.
on his campus. And that helps me as his mom, just to be able to see that. And so I think I often pray that God would just give me a dream or a vision or something of Ezra, just so I could have that tiny little picture as his mom to look forward to. Not as like an affirmation of what's true. Like, I'm like, it's in God's word. I believe it's true, but just a picture to hold on to, because I think that, as a mom, we just want to know where our kids are. We want to see a
Yeah.
picture of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that's hard when we can't even really
Yeah.
imagine. We can't really even
Yeah.
wrap our minds around
Yeah.
where they are.
Yeah. It's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 8, and I can relate to this one too. I thought being unknown would help. When Hannah died, my husband was the high school principal in a small community,
Hmm.
where everyone knew us. And Hannah's journey was very public. Everybody knew
Yeah.
about it. And in our church, everybody knew about it. And I just wanted to kind of disappear for a while.
Hmm.
I wanted to
Yeah.
move far away. I wanted to go to a different church. I just wanted to not be that mom who lost a kid
Yeah.
for a while. How did you feel about that?
Yeah. I felt the same. Fort Collins is not that big. It's like 150,000 people. And like I said, Ezra was the school captain, and my husband's
Yeah,
a pastor. And so the school was intimately involved with it, and our church was intimately involved with the process. And then several churches in town were intimately involved. And so it was rare that we could go anywhere that people didn't come up to us and talk to us about Ezra. Or they would just kind of stare at us. Like, we'd go to our favorite coffee shop, and, people would just kind of keep looking at you, and you're like, okay, they
yeah,
know, they know that you're those people whose son,
right.
who lost their son. And, and also just like, I think we put like 25,000 miles on our car going to and from the hospital.
Sure.
And so, driving down I-25 and all the memories that come with that, and all the places that we'd go to with Ezra in town, and all these things that are just familiar. I wanted to leave everything behind and start over, because I thought, man, if I could just turn the corner and not have a memory of Ezra there, I think it would probably help, because you just feel this sense like there's, especially at the beginning, there's these constant triggers, there's
Right.
these constant reminders. But I think I realized that there would also be grief when no one knew my story and no
That's
one
right.
knew Ezra. Like, the reality is, we have new friends in our lives and new people since we lost Ezra who are very close to us, and they never knew Ezra. And that's really painful. You know,
Yeah.
like there's a piece of me that feels like they'll never really know our family because they never knew us as a family of seven. And
Right.
so I think I thought initially if I could just pack up and leave and forget, it would be easy. And then I realized, no, I think there'd just be a different type of grief. You're just
Hmm.
exchanging one for the other.
Right. Yeah. It's not something we can run away from or hide from, for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure.
Okay, so number 9 on your list of things that are different than what you expected is I thought clarity would come. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I thought that once the fog lifted of the loss and once the grief got a little bit easier, I'd be able to see more clearly what God was up to, and maybe it would all make more sense. You know, and we're more than 3 years past, and it still feels confusing and it still feels painful. And so I think I thought that I would have some clarity about the Lord's plan, and I don't.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine that I will. You know, I think we're really quick to try to assign purpose to things, like maybe God is doing this or maybe God is doing this. But I think the reality is that we don't know what God is up to and we don't understand what he's accomplishing. And we can trust that he's faithful and we can trust that he's good. But we also just have to sit in the dark and say, God, I'm going to trust you in the darkness because this doesn't make sense and it never will this side of heaven.
That's right. I think we have to reach the point where we are willing to surrender that
Hmm.
need for
Yeah.
clarity and
Yeah.
understanding. That's the only way we can move forward is to
Yeah.
surrender that.
For sure.
Yeah. Hmm. All right. So the last thing on your list of the things that were different than what you expected is I thought the hard days would subside.
Hmm.
Talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, it has gotten easier.
Yeah.
You know, at the very beginning, every day was hard. Every day, all day was hard. And you wake up each morning feeling like, oh, I'm actually living the nightmare that I just had. But I think I assumed that the hard days would just be gone. Like you'd kind of bring resolve and move forward. But the reality is that there's still some really hard days, and there's still days
Hmm.
that you just ache, and tears come a lot more easily than they used to. Just the other night, my 13-year-old son came in after we had tucked him in. It was like an hour past his bedtime. And he said, I'm really sad tonight. And I said, you know, do you want to talk about it? And he said, no, not really, but I just wanted you to know that I'm really sad and
Mm.
I'm really missing Ezra. And I'm like, thanks for
Yeah.
letting me know. And so I think the reality is that the hard days, they're more spread out, but they're still there and they probably always will be. And, you know, there's some that you can anticipate that have specific memories and specific dates, but there's also just those dates and times that pop up that you just don't anticipate and they kind of they take your breath away and they catch you off guard. And I had one of those a couple weeks ago where I just was really, really sad. And it took a couple days for the sadness to settle. And it did, but it caught me completely off guard.
Mm. Yeah. I think that is something that comes with time is you still have those hard days, but you also know that it will settle.
Hmm.
That you just kind of have to wait it out and eventually you kind of get your equilibrium back. But
Yeah.
those hard days are always going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. They do keep coming. And I do think you also, you bounce back more quickly.
Yeah,
You know, I
sure.
think, especially in the first couple of years, the really hard days like birthdays and
Mhm.
holidays and stuff like they took a lot out of me.
Yes.
And they would take several days to even just feel like you could emotionally recover.
Right.
Whereas now we have those days and kind of the anticipation of them is hard.
Right.
But then we get through and I'm like, okay, we got through and
Yeah.
I'm able to move on more quickly than I was beforehand.
Right. And hopefully that's an encouragement too to somebody who's listening that those
Yeah.
really hard days, like you said, it took so much time to just recover from
Hmm.
those days for a
Yeah.
few years. And now, there's still a hard day, but you do recover more quickly, get back on
Yeah,
your feet. And
for
yeah, it
sure.
doesn't drag you down quite as far and
Yeah,
keep you there as long. So that is
yeah,
something to look forward to, something to be encouraged about.
for sure.
Um, so a different post that you wrote,
Hmm.
you published something on May 13th of this year that described some of the lessons that you've learned in the third year of your grief. Would you share just a few of those with us?
Yeah. I have a deep curiosity about heaven,
Yeah.
that we talked a little bit about, but there's just a much deeper curiosity and longing for heaven that is probably new for me since losing Ezra. I mean, I think I wondered about it a little bit, but now I'm like, man, I'm really curious.
Yeah.
And I think there's things that are in scripture that are not definitive, and I think that can bring a lot of comfort. In Revelation 6, we see the martyred saints talking to God about something that they see going on earth. And so for me, what that's done is it leaves the door open to wonder if maybe at times Ezra can see small pictures of us down here. And I find comfort that I don't think it goes against what we see in scripture. And while it's descriptive and not prescriptive, I can find comfort in that and knowing that there's nuances that we don't necessarily
Mhm.
understand, but it doesn't go against God's word.
Right.
Um, I think that grief is deeply lonely and it's personal and it's incredibly difficult. But I used to view it as an enemy to overcome. But now I think I view it as something that needs to be gently tended and carried with us. I think I've also reconciled the fact that the healing miracle that I long to see would have only been a temporary solution, that Ezra still would have had to die, just because of sin, and God has promised death. So that miracles are temporary solutions.
That's right.
And so that's brought a lot of comfort in helping me remember, we only lost Ezra for a season, we'll be
Hmm.
reunited, but even had God healed him, it would have been temporary.
That's right.
Um, and then I think too, recognizing that knowing and speaking what's true doesn't always bring comfort, at least not in the moment. And so I think it's easy to get discouraged in your faith if you're feeling like I'm speaking what's true, I know what's true, and I just can't find any comfort in that. Like recognizing that that's part of the journey sometimes, and that the comfort will come, but it doesn't always come in the way and in the timing that we're hoping it might.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for those. Those are all encouraging. What specific words of encouragement would you give to someone who may be listening who is just at the very beginning of their grief journey? Maybe in those
Yeah.
very early weeks or months, or even that first year when we know everything is still so, so difficult. What would you say to them to encourage them?
Yeah, I would say that the road that you're on is a marathon
Mm,
and there's no quick way to do it. So just encourage you to endure, that it's a long process, but God will help you endure. I think the more you try to avoid it, the longer the process is going to be.
mm,
And so press in as much as you're able. I would say talk to God angry, that He already knows what you're feeling and He knows what you're thinking anyway. And I think what we see in the book of Job is that Job said and believed some really wrong things about God, but God was really gracious and quick to forgive. And so He'll be the same with you. And so, yeah, talk to God, even if you're angry, just lay that all out there. I'd say encourage you to find people to walk with you. Don't try to walk it on your own, because it is a long and lonely journey. And having people walking with you, reminding you of truth, praying for you is really important. If you're married, understand that your spouse will grieve really differently than you do, and that you need to talk really openly about what you need and also ask what they need. And also just recognizing if you have other kids, that kids are really resilient and it's easy to assume that they're okay, but also really press into your kids and make sure that you're checking in on them and asking them about their hearts and asking them about their faith and asking them about how they're feeling about God. I asked one of my sons right after we lost Ezra, how are you feeling about God? And he said, I know God is faithful, but he wasn't faithful in this. And I'm like, yeah, I
Mm.
understand how you're feeling like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Sure.
And so, it gave us some good opportunities to talk. But again, I think it's really easy to get so focused on our own pain that we forget that those in our family are also really suffering. And so being super intentional, which I think probably sounds totally overwhelming,
Mm.
um, but being intentional about making sure to press into those people that are really closest to you, and view grief as something to do together, walk together, not something that you are in two different lanes doing it separately.
Mm. Such good advice. Everything you said is so helpful. I appreciate you and I appreciate your blog because everything that you write, everything that you've shared in our conversation is so practical, very helpful. Thank you for that. I just
Oh, thank
appreciate that.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one last question I always like to ask. Has music been an important part of your grief journey? And if so, what is on your
Mm.
playlist?
It's kind of ebbed and flowed.
Yeah.
I went through a long season, I mean, the first year and a half of just needing solitude and silence. And I found a lot of healing in
Mm,
solitude and silence.
sure.
And then I think, Ezra was a musician, and he would take sound, like he took sounds from the hospital. So like he had a door that creaked every time it opened and closed, and he recorded that and recorded one of his IV machines beeping and his heart monitor, and he incorporated all of those into music. And so
Wow.
he wrote a bunch of songs that are on SoundCloud. And so for a season, I listened to those. As I was, you know, I listened a lot to Shane and Shane, Psalm 46, which is Lord of Hosts, especially like going to and from the hospital. That was kind of my anthem. And I think now I need more reminders of who God is and
Mm,
just his tenderness towards me. So songs like The Goodness of God, things along those lines, would be songs that I go to now.
yeah. I just have to go back to that he used the sounds from his hospital room and
Hmm.
created music out of those.
Yeah, yeah. He incorporated them. So, I mean, I think you can get a free account on SoundCloud. And
Yeah.
I think if you just search up Ezra Black, you'll be able to find some of the music that he did. But he was just incredibly creative and was just always
Yeah.
hearing how that could incorporate into music.
Right. Wow. That's fascinating. Well, thank you for those songs.
Yeah.
We love Shane and Shane as well. We usually close our retreats with a Shane and Shane song. So
Mm.
I'll have to look into the one that you mentioned there. I don't think I've heard that one. But thank you again. If people want to get connected with you, if they want to read your blog, where do they find it?
Yeah, it's just www.faithfulparadox.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also reach out to me through that blog. So, but
Okay.
I'd love to engage with people or, chat with you. I mean, losing a child is like nothing else that I've ever experienced. And it's a unique and intense pain that just
Mm,
touches every part of your life.
yeah. Well, God has gifted you with the ability to put into words what many grieving parents have experienced or are experiencing. And I think people would enjoy following your blog. And I will put a link to your blog in the show notes so people can find
Thank
it
you.
easily.
Yeah,
And thank you so much, Kirsten. I have enjoyed our conversation so
I have
much.
too. Yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
having me. It's been good to get to know you a little bit.
absolutely. I'm so grateful to Kirsten for sharing Ezra's story and discussing her own journey of grief and faith so honestly. If you'd like to read more of Kirsten's writing, you can find her blog at faithfulparadox.com. I'll include a link in the show notes so it will be easy for you to find. If you're listening today and you're walking through the loss of a child, please remember that you're not alone. There's a whole community of grieving parents who understand this journey, and there is hope even in the midst of deep sorrow. If this episode encouraged you, I'd love for you to share it with another grieving parent who might need to hear it. You can also help others find the podcast by leaving a rating or a review wherever you listen. It really does make a difference. And if you'd like to learn more about the While We're Waiting ministry, visit whilewe'rewaiting.org for information about our retreats, our support groups, and other resources for grieving parents. I so enjoy meeting listeners at While We're Waiting events, and I would love to see you sometime soon. Thank you for listening and for walking this journey with me while we're waiting.